Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this nice, chilly April afternoon. So, for those that are just joining for the first time, my name is Lakeisha Hall. I'm the planning director for Prince George's County. You're going to have a great time with us for the next few minutes during the lunch hour. So, we do have some folks here in person. So, we're super excited for those folks that are here at Global Cafe. If you are interested or if you're in the area, feel free to swing by. We do have tables here, we do have some snacks. And so we're super excited for those that are here in person. We also see a good turnout online. So thank you guys also for joining us remotely. And so I was told by the team that we're on session eight, ocho. And so we're super excited because this year we learned a lot about processes throughout the county. We're talking about different topics. This topic is probably one of my favorite topics. It talks about subdivision. And it's one of those topics that's super important, but we're going to get into the specifics of it. And so I'm super excited as well to be able to join you guys today. If there are any special guests or elected officials online, we welcome you and we thank you for your partnership as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team. We do have some icebreaker questions. I threw in a tough icebreaker question as well. So hopefully you guys can get that one answered. So here's Deputy Director Hunt. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our eighth session for this brown bag series that we have. Today, we'll be discussing the subdivision regulations. This is the fun stuff along with zoning, but the subdivision regulations are really critical part to the development here within Prince George's County. So we're going to kind of go through to kind of start everything off with a few icebreaker questions. So we can go to the next slide. So, all right. First one, so I'm going to step out from behind the podium here so I can actually see. So, what subtitle of the Prince George's County Code can the subdivision regulations be found? And that for the folks in the online, if you could do me a favor and plug that information in the chat. If you're going to be A, subtitle 25, B, subtitle 27, C, subtitle 24, or D, subtitle 4. Let me know.
There's a, yeah, there's a couple people responding. They're saying C.
All right.
And some people, yep, subtitle 24.
All right.
So people, yeah.
Go ahead.
We've got a couple people responding, and most of them are saying subtitle 24.
Well, those folks who chose C are correct. It is subtitle 24. Okay. So congratulations, those folks. Now, next, we're going to move on to the next question. Under the subdivision regulations, which governing body has authority to make final decisions for the subdivision applications? Okay. Is it going to be A, the Prince George's County Council or the District Council? B, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning's Prince George's County Planning Board? C, the Prince George's County Board of Appeals? Or D, the Prince George's County Circuit Court? Which one of those four public bodies has that authority? It sure enough is not me. I will say that much. I don't want it. Okay.
Got a couple people saying B. One person saying C. They're still thinking maybe. Need some Jeopardy music.
I know. I was getting ready to say, if I could sing, I might do the Jeopardy song, but I don't think that'd be a good thing right about now.
Some people in the audience here are saying D. And they're saying C and sitting inside here. One person online said A. I think that might be it.
All right. So if you answered B, you are absolutely correct. So the Prince George's County Planning Board makes the final decision. However, I will say this, it can get appealed. That decision can get appealed to the circuit courts. All right. Next one. This is the final one. This is the one the planning director was talking about. So if you have any planning background, you may know this one already. However, as developers increased purchasing large tracts of land, when did the subdivision process become popular in the United States? Is it A, the post-war era around the 1950s near Levittown in New York? B, during the master plan process of Seaside in the 1980s in Florida. C, with the development of Radburn in New Jersey, which were in the 1920s, a garden city by urban planners Clarence Perry and Ebenezer Howard. Or D, when the National Harbor was being planned in Prince George's County in the 1990s.
I know this is a tough question for those that are not familiar with some of these projects. As a shameless plug, if you haven't seen any of these projects, it's super, super important to put on your bucket list. They are great examples of projects that have stood the test of time, that's gone through very amazing subdivision practices. So, of course, we know about National Harbor. So where are we with the answers? Are folks trickling in their answers?
There we go.
This is a tough one. The last round of Jeopardy on this one.
So we've got a couple of people saying C. I'm trying to see. Oh, no, excuse me. Someone just responded A.
Okay.
Anybody in the audience here have a guess? Popular says A. Okay.
All right. So to get this moving forward, the answer is A. As you guys know, Levittown pretty much started the conversation of how do you start to subdivide large tracts of land. Levittown is one of the premier residential communities in the country that was developed after the post-World War era. So, like I said, if you guys haven't seen any of these developments, please check them out. They're pretty amazing. We're trying to do similar processes here when we subdivide land in Prince George's County. So with that being said, back to you, James.
All right, so that is wonderful. So as we did in the last session where we talked about CB 15 or Council Bill 15, the amendments to the zoning ordinance that took place last year, I wanted to really start off talking about the general plan. That's our overall focus of everything when it comes to planning in Prince George's County is the general plan. It guides development throughout Prince George's County. Any comprehensive plan that any jurisdiction does, that is the overall, what I've always referred to with my team as the Bible, so to speak, when it comes to planning. So that said, the general plan for Prince George's County was Plan Prince George's 2035. That's one that gave all the guiding principles for growth, as well as identifying any specific assets here within Prince George's County, and it just, again, how Prince George's wanted to grow and identifying the resources, everything associated here within the county. Also kind of guides the master planning process. It guides everything that follows right in line with the zoning ordinance as well. So next slide. So, as I said earlier, we're going to be really starting to talk about the subdivision regulations today. When it comes to the subdivision regulation, that process is pretty much the third step in the overall development process here in Prince George's County. So, you're going to start off master planning. That's kind of identifying within, all over Prince George's County, how the county wants to grow, what the development would look like on all over the county or a specific area of the county. Then you go into the zoning process, which we've kind of talked about already. And then next you go into subdivision. So next slide. So we're really going to talk as it relates to subdivision. What is subdivision? So the process and configuration of land by which one or more lots, tracts, or parcels of land are divided, consolidated, or established as one or more lots or parcels or other division of land. So what does that say? Anybody want to chime in here? Anybody in the audience or anybody online? What does that really say to you? What does that mean? One second, I'm going to.
Person has a fairly large plot of land and they want to sort of break that out into individual pieces because it's not going to be just one thing on a big plot of land. That initial process of breaking that out into the individual ways in which that land is going to be used.
That's absolutely correct. So how are we going? So we're actually talking about, it's the actual process of subdividing or breaking up the land, because you've already zoned the land, what you want, how you want to grow, what the densities that you want to have allocated towards that property or all properties throughout the county. So what's the next process? Just subdividing that land. What is it going to look like? You're talking about, when it comes to segments of right of way. Are we talking about properties, lots? We're talking about different larger parcels of land. Even when you're consolidating land, all that's what that's really talking about. That's actual step to do that. Here in Prince George's County and in the state of Maryland, adequate public facilities are actually done through this process. So we're looking at now the applicant coming in, telling us exactly what they want to do. That said, we're going to have to go through and have to assess to ensure there are a significant amount of facilities, I should say, that are going to be able to serve that location. We're talking about transportation, parks, police response times, fire response times, all these different things associated with that. So under subdivision, we have the three purposes. One is to really design the design of internal streets and utilities, which is what I was talking about earlier. Also, the relationship of those streets and utilities within the subdivision and the larger community. So how that's actually connecting to overall Prince George's County. And then last but not least, determining the location of those infrastructure and other improvements as well. Next slide. So when does the subdivision apply? So under the subdivision regulations, under 24-1401. So we're getting into the legalese of stuff now. Okay. So, but it's in the subdivision regulations. It specifically states exactly when these regulations actually apply. We're talking about the subdivision of land. And if you all may not be able to see this, those folks online should be able to see it, but the subdivision of all lands within the boundaries of the regional district, within Prince George's County, unless subdivision is expressly exempted, under the section 24-1403. So, question. That being said, we said in here the regional district within Prince George's County. Does everyone, well, let me kind of clarify here. I didn't want to ask the question. The regional district, what is the regional district? Well, the state of Maryland, when they formed the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission back around 1927, they formed the regional district. What that is that area within Prince George's and Montgomery counties in which we handle the parks, recreation, and planning functions for those areas. Now, where does that not apply in Prince George's County? Can anyone online give me which jurisdiction within Prince George's County is not within the regional district? Bingo. If you said Laurel, you are absolutely correct. The city of Laurel itself, proper Laurel, I should say, because there are areas outside of Laurel that are within Prince George's County that we associate there. That is not within the original district that we have. So that said, all other areas throughout Prince George's County, the Prince George's County Planning Department actually works very closely with them in order to handle those planning functions and work with them on their planning functions throughout their jurisdiction, as well as all over Prince George's County. Montgomery County has similar situation where they have some municipalities there that are not within the regional district as well. But we're going to focus obviously on Prince George's County today. Also here, the conversion of use from residential or non-residential to residential, or the conversion of either a residential or non-residential use to mixed use. So these are when these regulations are actually applicable. And last but not least, if you're going to amend the findings or conditions of those said approvals for the subdivision that's been approved as well. So we have one question.
Do subdivision regulations require conformity to the master plan, sector plan, plan 2035?
Yes, absolutely. So there is a required finding for conformance to the master plan at the preliminary plan of subdivision phase. So that's really when you're getting into the actual development itself, and when you're talking about the overarching general plan as well as the master plan that's out there. So that is a discussion as a part of the required findings there.
What about federal lands?
Federal lands are pretty much not applicable when it comes to this process, okay? Because there's a separate process associated for them. All right, next slide, please. All right, so now within any area within the zoning ordinance or the subdivision regulations, we're really going to talk about who has those review responsibilities. So we have, of course, the county executive here within Prince George's County. We also have the district council, which is our county council. So when within that Maryland, the regional district that we have, the county council they have two hats. They have actually three hats, I believe, to be honest. But the two hats that are, for when it comes to relates to zoning are between the county council and the district council. Whenever they put on the district council hat, they're actually able to make decisions on zoning aspects, on anything related to zoning, as well as the subdivision regulations for the actual text and legal aspects of it. Also, the planning board, the planning director, and then the Historic Preservation Commission. Those those five entities are decision makers when it comes to a lot of the decision bodies when it comes to subdivision. Okay. And that's all can be found in this chart within section 24-3200 of the subdivision regulations. In here, if you can, some of you here may not be able to see this, but folks online should see it. It really identifies exactly what type of authority that they actually have. So is it D, the decision authority? R, they can make a recommendation. C, you can make comments. A, they have the appeal authority. And then also there's a requirement, or it shows exactly if they have to have a public hearings required for that process, and if the sign's in there as well. Okay, so that's kind of hidden in here within this chart. So it's very clear to not only the staff that are kind of utilizing the subdivision regulations, but also anybody who's going to be utilizing to see the regulations as well. So it's very straightforward when it comes to identifying that information there. Next slide. So a part of the subdivision administration, which is under 24-3 of the part 24-3 of the subdivision regulations, to make it very clear, there is a 70-day mandatory action time frame for those major subdivisions. What does that mean? That means that when the applicant submits an application and the planning director, I want to make it very clear, it's the planning director's authority there to deem that application to be accepted. So if that applicant has met all the submittal requirements that are identified within the subdivision regulations, we have a checklist and everything associated with that. So as long as they met those requirements, then they can get accepted into that application process, the subdivision application process. Now, from the date of acceptance to the date of the planning board making a decision, it cannot extend past 70 days. However, there is one stipulation that the applicant has to agree to. They can agree to another 70-day waiver or extension for a maximum of 140 days. Okay, so that's only the applicant has to agree to that. Typically, we see that situation take place whenever there's additional information that has to be provided, additional analysis that's needed may not be able to be completed within that 70-day time period as well. So all that's kind of done at that time, within that time frame, and cannot be extended past that 140 days. Now, if we get to that 140th day and the planning board, let's say, does not make a decision, that application gets approved with no conditions. So that's why this planning department works very hard to ensure that that case is brought before the planning board within that time frame, the allotted time frame there, and we work very closely with the planning board so they have the information they have to make a decision on that application. So we meet all requirements related to the law for that mandatory action time frame. As you all know, the same thing it's very similar to the zoning ordinance. However, the zoning ordinance, the difference there is that a lot of the zoning applications like detailed site plans, they have a maximum 70 days. However, they have an indefinite extension that could take place, indefinite waiver is what I call it. So for example, the applicant can waive their mandatory action time frame indefinitely. Here, you can't do that for the subdivision regulations when it comes to a preliminary plan of subdivision. Okay, only difference. So under the new subdivision regulations, it does require a pre-application neighborhood meeting as well as pre-application conferences to take place. This is very new under this the new subdivision regulation and the zoning ordinance. Why? Because our citizens, and I completely agree, this planning department, the commission, and the council all agree that the citizens need to be made aware and engaged in the development process at every step as much as possible. That said, the citizens wanted to have a meeting with the applicants on the development so they can get information about the application so they don't just wait and see whenever a sign for a public hearing is taking place. They're aware of it before it goes in. They're aware of all that takes place. So anything they can ask the questions to the applicant, start that engagement process. So they don't want to be caught blindsided, as most of us don't want that, right? If you're going to have a development right beside your house, you don't want a 30-story tower coming up right beside your house and you don't know what's going on, right? You want to be able to be in the loop on what's taking place. So that said, you have a pre-application neighborhood meeting, and the pre-application conferences. Those conferences are for the applicant to come in and talk to staff and get some preliminary comments or conceptual comments on the application. Okay, they bring us concept plans, so they're not, when they come to us, nothing set in stone. They're giving us conceptually, say, hey, pretty much, here's what I have, here's what I'm thinking about. Can you give me some comments? Where that came from was originally we were a lot of times scheduling these meetings with applicants all the time to say, hey, because they would come to us with these plans and they wanted to get comments. So that's what we would do. We would always sit down in the meeting in a conference room and give them those comments at that point. This formalizes that process and makes it a requirement for a lot of the applications as well. Also, within the administrative section, you see there are the development standards and the certificate of adequacy that's required. Now, under the development standards, it's pretty much telling you what the standards are of development when it comes to the subdivision regulations and what we want to see when it comes to subdivision. And also the certificate of adequacy. That's different from the prior subdivision regulations because adequacy was determined at the time of subdivision. Now, the county council has broken up that process to where the certificate of adequacy is issued by the planning director prior to the application going in before the planning board. So pretty much you have to have a certificate of adequacy approved before this application is heard before the planning board. That pretty much says that the planning director has found that there are adequate services to serve that site itself, okay, as a part of the process. And as a part of that, we coordinate, make it very clear, it's not just the planning department working out on an island on this. We're working very closely with all our partner agencies, such as the fire department, the police department. We're working, getting information back from schools. We're looking at water and sewer services that are going to be serving that facility or that site, the development. Also parks, all that is a part of that process, adequacy process and evaluation. Got one question?
Does adequacy include clean, renewable energy?
That is not a part of the process. So adequacy is pretty much the adequate public facilities to serve the site. So any required services that the county or any type of public agency are required to provide, it's just an analysis to say that they, as a part of what's being proposed, they're going to be able to serve this location sufficiently from at this point when it comes to the development itself. So and that's analysis takes place at a certain point in time. So we're looking at this point in time, how the existing services are going to be able to serve that site. Have another question?
Don't people need electricity?
Yes, they do need electricity. So, however, that is served as a part of a separate process that's analyzed. So those services are not services that are provided by the county. So that individual electric company, so Pepco, Smecco, BGE, that's their responsibility. There is a public service commission with the state, so I think from the state level, that handles all the electricity. So those companies go to that organization or that agency to ensure there's enough power coming in at that. But we do, as a part of our process, we analyze or put that as a part of a referral that may go out to those agencies as well, but it's not required for them to get back to us on that. Okay. All right. And kind of moving on here. Also, certificate of adequacy, and this is a really big factor that a lot of folks are concerned about, is transportation. Transportation is analyzed as a part of the certificate of adequacy process. So that's, if you all recall back in both January and February, Crystal Saunders Hancock, who is the supervisor of the transportation planning section, did a really great job of explaining the transportation process in addition to the transportation review guidelines. So if you have an opportunity, go back and take a look at that video from both January and February, where she gave a lot of detail and analysis or insight on what that process is. But that's done at the time of the certificate of adequacy review with the preliminary plan of subdivision. Next, we're talking about reconsiderations. So reconsiderations are ones where the applicant can request, if, for example, after an approval takes place or whatnot, if they want to have their application reconsidered before the planning board to make some changes to it, there's a specific time frame they have to do that. And so the subdivision regulations lists out what those reconsideration requirements are in order for the planning board to be able to take that under advisement there and to reconsider that request to take place. The appeals process, which is what I talked about earlier, that they applicants or whomever, a party of record, can appeal the decision of the planning board, and they would have to go to the courts on that one. Okay. The subdivision interpretations. That's a new process as well. So what is a subdivision interpretation? A lot of times applicants will want to get information and really get a determination on, for the subdivision regulations, applying it to this actual property itself. What does that mean? How does the planning department interpret this potential piece of legislation as it relates to the subdivision regulations? How is it going to be applied here? So they are very clear on how they need to proceed forward. So it's a legal document or a document that's been provided by the planning director. It's all under the planning director's authority. So the applicant, the attorney, whomever it is, would actually submit that request to the planning director to get more information on how she is going to interpret the subdivision regulations and apply that to that property. So it's not making it general. So it's not saying it's going to be blanketed for everything throughout Prince George's County. It's really very much applicable to that particular site itself. So yes, we got a question up here. Sorry, 1 second. They're going to give you the mic real quick. Sorry.
Oh, yes. Just checking. Are these interpretations made public?
Yes, they are. So what happens, we have on our website, after the planning director signs off on that, she puts her initials on that interpretation, our team will then publish that on our website. So we've done a few zoning ordinance interpretations. We don't have that many subdivision interpretations. I can't recall, and David, do you know if we have? I don't think we have ever had a subdivision interpretation come through, but I do know we've had a few zoning ordinance interpretations that came through. But, truth be told, this is something that's not new to the planning industry or any jurisdiction. This is something that's very common through a lot of jurisdictions around the country because they want to get that confirmation that they can actually do what they're planning to do or what process they need to file in order to do that. Okay, next slide. All right, we talked about public facility adequacy. Within the subdivision regulations, it goes through and exactly provides the level of services that are required for that potential public facility, for example. So under the transportation, you can see under the chart, it's talking about area of applicability. So you're talking about in the regional transit oriented or the LTO based zones and PD zones. What are those requirements that are associated with that? It'll send you to the transportation review guidelines, whatever those levels of services are required there. It makes it very clear to everyone what those levels are in order to meet adequacy. What does that look like? So all that's listed within this chart that we have under 24-4502 of the subdivision regulations. It provides the standards there. As a part of we talked about this back in February when it came to the transportation review guidelines. I know we're working on our Go Prince George's. Yes, everyone's going to take a part of that and be a part of this, right? Go Prince George's. You saw the draft plan. It's out there. It's online. Take a look at it. Provide us feedback that you have. But as a part of that process, we're going to review and analyze and see if we can do an update to the transportation review guidelines. Because once that whole master plan changes, we got to review our process to make sure it matches up with that actual master plan. So that's kind of one of the later steps that we're going to be looking at as a part of that process. Okay, so we're going to have to get that updated at some point. Also, as it relates to this, you're talking about the parks and recreation guidelines. What does that look like? So those standards are in there. Not only that, but we're talking about public safety guidelines associated with that, and also school clusters. What are they looking like? So any updates there? Our special projects team keeps up with all that information, and they provide their referral comments associated with those guidelines that are out there. Okay, next slide. All right. And then we're also going to continue on, same thing here when it comes to development requirements prior to the expiration of the period of validity. So when it comes to a final plat, as recorded, you have to have a minimum amount of development that's going to be required, pretty much about 90% in order to say that that's been vested, so to speak, there. And also it kind of goes into the details of each one of those different stages that are there as well. So you'll see that specific chart within the subdivision regulations. These have to be approved in conjunction with the preliminary plan of subdivision or final plat. Also, it's valid for 12 years with possible 6-year extension. And also expires with the preliminary plan of subdivision or development has not been, or if the development has not been commenced at that point. So, so just take a look. And when it comes to the vesting requirements, pretty much you have to ensure once you get your approval, you've got to get in and start continuing down the process of development. You can't just stop. And it's not going to say, like I said, once you get that approval, it's not to say, oh, you can do it, 30 years down the road, you're going to be able to start the project. No, you got to start being active on these things. Okay. So, and that's pretty much standard across the board. Any jurisdictions you're going to run into a time period that you have to get your work completed or show that this is vested, so to speak. Okay. Next slide. The preliminary plan of subdivision, these are the major and minor steps for the process itself. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail here because these charts here are pretty much telling you exactly step by step what's needed. We talked about the pre-application conference. That's really pretty much the first step. So once you get that, staff's going to give you an application number. So typically under new subdivision regulations, it's going to be PPS, let's say -2025-001, for example. So they'll give you your case number, and then you make sure you file your concept plans, all your plans associated with that for staff to do their review and analysis. And it'll follow each stage here within the process. Here within the chart, again, we don't do things that are outside of what the code requires us to do. So therefore, that's why it's very important to take a look within this chart itself. You'll see the various sections of the subdivision regulations that really govern that requirement there. So it gives more detail of where they can find. So the pre-application neighborhood meeting 24-3303 gives you all the information that's needed for that pre-application neighborhood meeting and what you need to submit back to us when it comes to that particular process itself. Same thing for the preliminary plan of subdivision or minor subdivision. It gives you information about the determination of completeness, staff's review, and action timelines that are associated in there, because all these things are under the code and what it says. So we're following it. So we're going to, so you all have the background. We're not just going out here and making decisions out here off a whim. We're doing it based upon what the subdivision regulations require there. Okay. Next slide.
James,
Yes.
what is a minor subdivision? How many homes?
So it's 10 or fewer lots, I believe at that point in time. It's 10 or fewer lots. So think of it like that. And I think there's a square footage associated for non-residential development as well. Maybe I think it's 5,000 square feet. Don't quote me on that one, but it's listed within, if you go within that chart, that actual code section, it'll provide you the applicability where it would be a determination whether it be a minor or a major subdivision. All right. Oh, you can go back to that one. Is this the one? Oh,
So this one we're talking.
oh, sorry. Go to the, I'm sorry. You're right. Okay, so now you talk about the final plat. So what is the final plat? After you receive your approval for your preliminary plan of subdivision and you've gone down the road of your detailed site plan process, now you're going to final plat, because now you're going to take the information, and I apologize, we got some conversations going on in the back, but when it comes down to the detailed site plan, right now you're going to put all that approval onto one document, and getting it approved by the various entities pretty much has to go to the planning board for that signature, or the planning director for that signature. If it's a minor, planning director; major, it goes to the planning board for approval. And it's on the planning board's agenda. It's docketed on the planning board's agenda. And I'm not sure, we may have one on this Thursday's agenda as well, but you'll see those typically are indicated by a 5- number that's on there. But what it does, it's indicating the actual approvals that have taken place, and once that signature is provided, the developer can go straight over to land records and say, hey, I've got this document, I'm good to go, this is what my development's going to look like. And once they do that, they give that to, when they go to DPI as a part of their construction documents, because DPI wants to see, okay, what at the end of the day, what's going to be at this site? So what's been approved? So is it a 2-story apartment building that's going to be there? If that's the case, what's the setback? What are the setbacks going to be? What are the conditions associated with this? All these various things they're going to see on this final plat. So that said, all that information will be provided to DPI so we can get, so the applicant can be provided a building permit eventually, that goal. Yes.
What if the property's property lines are being questioned?
So if the property lines are being questioned, so that's a part of the subdivision process. And so once you get the final plat's going to tell you where those property lines are going to be there. So that's going to indicate where those property lines are. So if it's being questioned, typically what we found, and I'm going to say in my background, you can get a surveyor to come out and survey that property and ensure that those property lines are consistent with what that final plat has been provided for that property. Okay, because it's going to show you exactly where your property lines are going to be. But typically, you have to have that. And I will say this for any homeowner here in Prince George's County, and I tell people this all the time, when you go to purchase a home or property, be sure at settlement you get your plat. Ensure that you get your plat, because if you don't, you're going to have to pay to get a surveyor eventually to come out. If you want to do an addition later, if you want to put a shed in the back of your property, whatever you want to do, if you do an addition or whatnot, you're going to have a plat. So that said, ensure when you go to closing that you have that plat with you in your settlement documents. That is very, very important because the costs, as you all know, are going to rise. They're not going down, they're rising. So be sure to make sure you have that as a part of your settlement that goes on. Here, just we have, like I said, with the final plat, you have the major final plats, which are ones that went before the planning board, and then the minor final plats and what the process is behind it, just so you all are aware there. Next slide. Now, subdivision in Prince George's County. This is what I talked about earlier, pretty much. I don't want to be redundant here, but the county council and the county executive, they're going to review and document the regulations associated with that, right? And then also the planning board is making the final authority when it comes to applications. Now, the county council, they're looking at it to set up the regulations, right? What are the regulations looking like? The county executive is a part of that process. But eventually, the planning board will have the final authority on specific applications as they come through. Included are the preliminary plans of subdivision, minor and major, final plats, like we talked about, certificates of adequacy, and vacation petitions. What is a vacation petition? Anyone? It's on the screen. Anybody knows? All right. This is whenever we want to abandon. Oh, sorry, real quick. So, no problem, no problem. Abandonment of record plats. So if they want to abandon record plats, typically a vacation petition we see a lot of times when there's a roadway on a property and someone wants to kind of vacation that right of way, or vacate that right of way there. So I've seen that recently as a couple within the past year or so within College Park. You may see a right of way that's being vacated that that someone wants to utilize there. So that's a separate process associated with that. So that's the vacation petition process. They have to request that, and we have to review that along with all those various agencies that are part of the process there. Next slide. So in the part 24 I don't want to go into a lot of detail here, but here we're looking at as far as the subdivision standards, the planning and design, we're really looking at that there. Transportation, which we talked about earlier, and that's not just vehicular transportation, bike, pedestrian, as well as any type of circulation. Environmental standards that are out there, public facility standards, parklands and rec facilities, as well as conservation subdivision standards. Okay. Now, a conservation subdivision. Can anybody give me an insight or thoughts on what they think a conservation subdivision is? I'm trying to be as interactive as possible here. Anyone, I mean, you can, if you think you're right, if you're wrong, whatever, it doesn't matter. Just give me some insight. Go ahead. So hold on.
It's a subdivision that is designed to preserve some sort of environmental features or natural features.
Absolutely, Mr. Kennedy is absolutely correct. That's right. Exactly what it is. So there are a lot of environmental features on a site, and so the intent is to preserve those environmental features. So as a part of that process, sometimes applicants want to get a little bit more density as a part of that, right? So if they're going to preserve those features, they want to get a little more density as a part of that. So there's a whole analysis to take place, and a lot of times it may be a lot of higher standards associated with that because there are impacts to those environmental features. So we want to make sure those are preserved to the highest intent as possible. Next slide. So, public facility standards, we talked about this earlier. So transportation, the parks and recreation, although we're a separate department, we work very closely with our colleagues over the parks and recreation side. They have facility standards in there, so we work very closely with them, what those look like. We also, on this side, look at, what the applicants are going to propose as it relates to those features, because that is critical to recreate is very important when it comes to development. So a lot of times, some jurisdictions don't think a lot about recreation, how important it is. However, in Prince George's County, we know how important it is. We have some of the best park facilities in the country. We have award-winning park and rec facilities here in the country, and we want to continue to build on those facilities as much as possible. Also want to talk about, police, we can go back, police and fire response times. That's something else that's always, like I said earlier, it's analyzed as a part of the facilities process. And then, of course, the impacts to schools. Now, when it comes to schools, that's a totally separate analysis that takes place. So for schools, they let us know what the impacts are going to be. It's not a true test. Because why? Whenever developers go to get their permits, they have to pay a certain fee. Okay. So it's associated with that. There's no test associated with that. They have to go to DPI. They pay their fee associated depending on the number of dwelling units. So that information is provided at the time of preliminary plan of subdivision. However, they take that information, go to DPI, and pay that fee based upon that information we give to them at that time. Next slide. So I think this is getting towards the end here. The Chesapeake Bay critical area. These are these areas that are adjacent to a lot of our waterways here within Prince George's County. We know those waterways are going to impact the bay. So that said, back in the day, so to speak, and the state decided to protect, of course, had to protect the habitat and water quality of the Chesapeake Bay critical area. These standards allowed for a maximum future additional intensity and limited development in the CBCA of only 5% of the total area designated within that conservation area. The standards only allow for 50% of the permissible growth increment in those designated areas. And then last but not least, the implementation of these standards is actually necessary to provide proper planning and development and into the best interest of the citizens of Prince George's County. Okay, we want to protect the bay. And we have done a great job. I'm not just talking about Prince George's County. I mean, everyone has done a great job in improving the water quality associated with the bay, because we're seeing a lot more. I know you all like to eat crabs during the summertime. So that said, there's been a really big improvement there. I will say that much. And given the amount of development that we have in this area, this is really big for us. So we take and treasure the bay as much as possible. So we got to do all we can when it comes to development to protect our natural resources associated with that. Next slide. Now we come up towards the end. The enforcement side. I said this before. Who enforces here in Prince George's County? Yeah, they got enforcement in their name. DPI, the Department of Permitting, Inspections, and Enforcement. That is not the planning department, okay? We get a lot of calls. Can you go do this? Nope, sorry. Unfortunately, we don't do that. I'll give you my colleagues over in DPI. They can help you out on that part, okay? So they're going to handle that. They're looking at the various penalties. The subdivision regulations has the penalties in there. I'll say this, they're not huge when I say as far as the dollar amount, but when they start impacting multiple lots, it can add up. So be very clear on that. It can add up. So that said, you've got the penalties, the fines, the violations, all that information's in there. Our folks over at DPI, they handle that part of the process. So we work very closely with them. Next slide. So want to make sure everybody's aware we have all these great tools associated with us when it comes to development. We want to get information about all properties within the development process. You've got our data journal and net migration. You want more information about that. Go Prince George's, obviously. PG Atlas, amazing. I keep talking about that. Everybody, you can get a slew of information. There are links to other websites associated with it. You name it, you pretty much can get it there. And also, I have been guilty of this. I use acronyms all the time. You can get on our glossary of planning terms. It's all on there. So you can go in there, if you see James talking about what's a DET, and Go right there and get that information, what a DET is, what is a DSP, what is an SDP, what's a CDP. All that information is provided in there, okay? Next slide. Now, tell me your experience with any of those processes we talked about today. I want to get your feedback on this. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I'm always at a state of improvement. To me, nothing's ever right, so to speak. It's never going to be fixed until we continue to improve and get information back from the folks who are our stakeholders, which is not only the citizens, it's the development community, it's our county council members, it's our county executive's office, the municipalities throughout Prince George's County, anyone that's impacted within the development process. I want to get that feedback so we can continuously try to improve and streamline our processes so we can continue to be the best jurisdiction in the country. So that said, I'm looking to the folks online, our folks here in the room. What's been your experience with the subdivision process? Any of those processes that fall under subdivision, and some ideas that you all can give us to kind of improve that. Okay, because granted, there's some things that are codified. Don't get me wrong. That I can't say, oh, we're going to fix it right now. But if that's something we can put in our toolbox and think about, I want to do that. Okay, we're not saying that we're always right, but I want to be able to provide or take any feedback that you all have and see what we can do to streamline as much as possible to help kind of move development forward in the best way possible so it does not impact our citizens here. All right, anyone? Oh, sorry, coming.
This is more of a question. At what is the preliminary plan of subdivision? Is an application available? Is it available publicly? And if so, when is a particular applicant's application for the preliminary plan available to be viewed by the public?
So we are in the process of implementing our DARTS program. That's one. And so that will give a lot of insight and provide information about the application that comes in. However, at acceptance, a lot of times we go ahead and make sure that information is available, because what happens is, not to say now any document that we have within our possession is of course subject to the Maryland Public Information Act. So no matter what if we have it, if you want it, we give it to you. Okay. Now, when it comes to documents that are accepted, the reason why I say I really would kind of encourage anyone to wait till the application gets accepted, because that's pretty much what that developer is going to be doing. Okay, so that may change. There have been situations when an application has been what we call under the pre-acceptance process. That applicant will really come in and change the whole game. They'll switch it, and then next thing you know, it gets accepted. So I really encourage everybody to wait until it gets accepted. However, if they want it, I'm not going to tell them no. We're not going to tell them no because it's within our possession. So that said, it's available at any point in time that it's within our possession. We're working to get a lot more of our applications online. Even when it comes to our PG Atlas program, that once it gets accepted, they go ahead and put that application number so it can be mapped. And also it gives a project description there as well. So all that information is on there. Not only that, but on a weekly basis, our information management team does a phenomenal job. Whoever wants to get information about applications, once they get accepted, they can get an email sent right to them on a weekly basis. I'm a nosy person, so I want to know what's going on all over Prince George's County. So that said, I get a weekly email all the time about all the applications that come in. It may be some applications that may not go to the planning board. They may go to the planning board. There may be director level approvals, whatnot. They're all there. And so anybody, if you want it, you can get it at any point in time, either through PG Atlas or this email program. Not only that, but if anyone signs up to be a person of record, they can get the emails on there as well when it comes to which jurisdictions they want. Also, the registered civic associations that are out there, or associations period, the law under the subdivision regulations and zoning ordinance requires once those organizations or associations register with us, we send them, or the applicant will send them or notify them of development applications within those two councilmanic districts of their own and an adjacent one as well. Yes.
Improvements, streamlining the online submission permitting process, coordination with DPI, E-plans, project docs, and communication responsiveness needs to be improved.
Understood. Definitely understood. We are working on what I was talking about earlier, our DARTS program. So that is going to be, and we're looking to implement that in June. So our team is working very hard right now to ensure that that program stands up in June, and it's going to be a phased approach. So we're going to look at a few of our applications, get those up and running in June, and then we're going to continue to build on that throughout the year. So that's coming forward. And with that program, it's going to be we're going to be as transparent as possible. It's going to improve our transparency. Not only that, but improve our coordination efforts that we have as well to be able to streamline and get quicker responses when it comes to referral applications also. Now, I will say this, I want to make it very clear. The Department of Permitting, Inspections, and Enforcement, they have their own program. It's called Momentum. Now, I want to make it very clear, that's not the program that we have on this side. Our program is meant to streamline the entitlement process and connect over to their program. Their program is under permitting. So if the concerns are relevant to permitting, that is definitely through the Department of Permitting, Inspections, and Enforcement, but we're trying to work very closely together to streamline those processes at this point in time so it can be as transparent as possible.
So I know we're about to run out of time. I do see there are some other questions in the chat. Feel free to use the chat to also drop in some more comments and feedback. One thing we're thinking about doing is doing an FAQ. I've seen that happen successfully in other places that I worked in. So for instance, if there's questions about, do federal lands have to follow our subdivision regulations? We could have that as something that we can answer. If there's concerns about property lines, so some of these processes do not fall under planning, but what we could do is give you guys links on how to follow up on some of your questions. Keep in mind also our plans set the parameter for our code. So anytime that we have to look at our subdivision regulations, we're looking at the standards for the property. We're looking at the setbacks. We're looking at where the roads go. And so that's why we really appreciate everyone's comments today and questions. I know it's a very, very dense topic because keep in mind, we have to have transportation part of the process, right? We need roads. We mentioned fire rescue, water, energy. So it's all connected when it starts off when you subdivide a property based on tracts. So we're hoping that today was a helpful discussion. Like I said, please feel free to continue to put in comments in the chat after this session, and we'll definitely follow up. I think, team, we're going to maybe do a recap at the end of the series in a couple months, just to make sure we haven't missed anything and any action items we need to do moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap up.
All right, that sounds good. And so I wanted to thank everyone for coming out today. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be willing to take those as well. So we've got just 2 more minutes. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take those. We have.
Can you talk about the timing of how the certificate of adequacy is handled separately during the preliminary plan process under the new zoning ordinance subcode is not fully clear yet, particularly regarding communicating its status to the applicant?
So when it comes to the certificate of adequacy, that has to be filed typically at the same time, I'd say, as the subdivision application when it comes through. So that approval takes place typically right about 2 weeks before the staff report is published. So the regulations require, or actually not the regulations, it should be the planning boards or the development review guidelines require that the staff report for a preliminary plan of subdivision be published 1 week or actually 6 days prior to the planning board hearing on that application. Our team will then review, as a part of that process, will review the guidelines, not just transportation, but the adequacy associated with that application and have something to the planning director to review. So that signature hopefully will take place right before the publishing of that staff report. So once the staff report gets published, then that would mean that if there's a recommendation of approval or approval with conditions, that would mean that certificate of adequacy has been signed off by the planning director at that point in time. So all that would be done. As a part of the backup materials associated with that preliminary plan of subdivision, in there, you'll see the certificate of adequacy as a part of that process because you have to meet those required findings associated, which would be to ensure adequacy has been met. So that certificate says that adequacy has been met, that the planning director has found that adequacy is met for that project itself. So typically right before, about a week or 2 weeks before the publishing of that staff report is actually done. And so staff will then kind of coordinate with the applicant to let them know. Sure, go ahead.
Can you talk about reducing department review time, bringing forest conservation regulations more in line with state regulations, and keeping tree bank availability data more current?
So reviewing department, or actually reducing department review timelines. So 70 days, I'm going to be fully transparent here. That is a very much unheard of and quick timeline. Most jurisdictions around the country are typically about 6 months. For us to do a staff report at acceptance to the planning board within 2.5 months is pretty much almost unheard of. But we do a phenomenal job with trying to get this information reviewed and analyzed before the planning board. So that said, 70 days is very quick. I will say this, if you look at Montgomery County, they're doing 120 days. So us doing 70 is already very quick. There are mandatory requirements when it comes to public engagement. So for example, those signs that you all see for those public hearings have to be posted 30 days prior to that planning board hearing. So that's already, so if you take that 70, cut out 30 days, that's cutting into that timeline as well. So we want to make sure that the citizens have enough time to get involved in the process and know about it. That's one. And then not only that, but staff has to analyze and provide comments to the applicant. So pretty much about 2 weeks before or right after the application gets accepted, there's that what we call a subdivision and development review committee meeting. That's when we give those initial comments to the applicant on the application. And then we have to give the applicant time to get back to us those revisions that may be necessary during that time period. So we're talking about very quick time frame associated with it. So 70 days is already a really short time frame. We do all we can, and there's a lot of instances where we may even make, if we can, if it's a very straightforward project, we may still make that application, shorter as far as getting it to the planning board sooner. But typically that 70 days is already very short, very tight for staff and the applicant too. So, and then also for the citizens as well. So. Yeah, and what was the other? I think there are 2 other questions.
Bringing forest conservation regulations more in line with state regulations and keeping tree bank availability data more current.
So we are currently taking a look at what that entire process and the analysis associated with that. So we're going to get back to you on that. I know we had a session, a brown bag session. I think I remember correctly, that was December or November, where we talked about the woodland conservation ordinance, and that really gave the update to what that was. We're taking a look at that now since, that was enacted for July 1 of 2024. And since we've had enough time to kind of look through that and there have been, applications that have come through, now we're going to see what those impacts are and what the concerns are, if there are any, and also what's been working, what's not been working pretty much. And if we can make areas of improvement, we're going to look at that as well. So we're looking to identify those items. If you have any feedback, please let us know what that is, and we'll be able to take a look at that as well.
I appreciate the improved instructions for residents to attend and speak at planning board meetings. There has also been an improvement on the process sequence. I would ask that it be written in simpler language.
I completely agree. So we are working on right now updating our website. We want to have workflows on there to clean that up. So please look for those improvements very soon, as they will be occurring. I'm working very closely with our publications team to make sure the web's updated and very simple. We want to put everything in as simple format as possible.
Hi, where would I find the glossary of planning terms that you mentioned?
I'll have to get back to you to show you the exact site portion on that website. I have to navigate through there, but I'll get that to you so you have that. But if you go to our main page, you can put in their glossary of planning terms and it should pop right up for you. And that goes for anybody online too. That's going to be really important, I believe.
Can you provide info on how to subdivide a house from 15 acres of land?
Subdivide an existing home that's on 15 acres, I believe sounds like. So if that's the case, that it depends on how they're wanting to subdivide. So if they want to make 15 lots. And I also have to kind of look at the zoning as well, what that requires, what those, standards are there. So it's a little different. If that isn't, the process that we have online for the subdivision process that we talked about earlier details what the process is already. So if you want to kind of go back to those with the slides within the presentation, it gives you that information also going into those different steps in the process for a major subdivision and a minor subdivision, what that is. So if you have a minor subdivision, remember that's 10 or fewer lots. And then for a major subdivision, it would be more than that. Okay.
I think it's really important that planning include criteria related to implementation of our climate action plan and meeting the Maryland climate goals for decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. This means more attention to the availability of clean, renewable energy, energy resilience, and low carbon transportation options, as well as tree conservation. We need to build for the next century. Can planning board include these things as conditions, or does the county council need to change the subdivision regulations for these things to be taken into account?
Yeah, that would have to be a required finding in the law itself, in the code itself, in order to make that happen. I mean, there are some things that we can potentially look at doing, but the information would have to be in there as a part of the required findings associated with that. We would see if there's anything relevant to that climate action plan once it gets adopted. We can definitely try to go down that road to see how it adheres to the plan itself. So I understand we're running out of time. We're actually over time right now. I appreciate everyone again for coming out here today, as well as those who've joined us online. If you want to provide additional feedback, please continue to do so in the chat. We're going to take that information and then, like the director was saying earlier, kind of go back a little bit later to summarize the entire series from this year. And then we're also going to provide you with our next series for the remainder of be technically fiscal year 2025, whenever July 1 starts. But want to get that information out to you also. You're aware of that, and of course, participate that as well. Thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of your day.